Welcome to the Music Fundamentals lecture on triads. I'm Dr. Julietta Rabins, and this is based on the textbook A Creative Approach to Music Fundamentals by William Duckworth. This chapter introduces you to various types of triads, they're a specific type of three-note chord, triad. They are built from alternate notes in the scale, like an A, C, and E. That would be a triad. So it's not just any three notes, it's not just any three. You're starting with a scale, and you're playing alternate notes in that scale. There's another triad. And they can certainly include the black keys, but just for our first introduction here, I'll just show you a bunch of them on the white keys, because you get a real clear sense of the alternate notes in the scale being used. These are the building blocks of tonal harmony, because these are the chords that we draw from we start with a major or minor scale, and then we play alternate notes in that scale. You get a triad. So there's three pitches in a triad. We have the root of the chord. This is the fundamental tone of the triad. It is the note that names the chord. So if we were in the key of C major, this would be a C chord, D chord, E chord, F chord, G chord, A chord, so forth. The first note in the chord, the root, that names our chord. Then we have a third, the middle note of the triad. This note is real important because for every triad, it defines, if it's a major third above the root, it's a major triad. If it's a minor third above the root, it's a minor triad. Then we have the fifth note, the top note of the triad. It typically creates a perfect fifth above the root for all of your major and minor triads. When the fifth is altered, then we have a special case. It's either called a diminished or an augmented triad. So both a major and minor triad form a perfect fifth between between the root and the top note. A major triad has a major third between the tonic and the third, and then it's actually a minor third between the top two. So this is a major third plus a minor third. Now a minor triad has a minor third on the bottom, major third on top. And one thing that's a little bit interesting about major and minor triads, if you start with any perfect fifth and walk your way in, you've got two options for the middle note. And the higher of the two options is the major, the lower of the two is minor. So let's start with this fifth. So F major, F minor. Starting with G. G major, G minor. So let's do those three again. C major, C minor, F major, F minor, G major, G minor. Okay, then let's take this fifth, starting on D. Now notice our middle two notes, now the higher one is actually the black key. So this is D minor, D major. Let's take this fifth, E minor, E major. And now, starting here, A minor, A major. So it's helpful to learn these in groups. The C, F, and G chords look very similar on the piano keyboard. The major is all white keys, and then you have to lower the middle one to make it minor. D, E, and A chords are related because when you're just playing the white keys, it's minor, and then you have to raise it to make it a major. We now have the concept of closed and open position for triads. Closed position is pretty straightforward. It's what we've just been doing. It's the smallest smallest configuration for the chord. But you can stretch out a triad. You can play it in different order. We could take the E and put it up an octave. So that's still a triad. Or take D minor and then put the middle note up an octave. Still D minor. E minor. Let's put the G up an octave. Open position. Anything that stretches it out is open position. So for closed position, there's pretty much one way, root, third, fifth. Open position, this is one nice way to do it, but open position is actually a pretty general term because you could alter it a number of different ways. I mean, essentially this is a C major triad. This is A minor. You can, but those would be open position because it's just anything stretched out beyond an octave and so forth. Okay, so just like when we talked about intervals, major and minor is far and away the most common things that we're going to deal with. We do get these augmented and diminished. So let's start with the case of C major. We can alter it to C minor. Now we have an even smaller type of chord. It's called a diminished chord, and we're going to take our perfect fifth here, make it diminished. Now it's a diminished chord. So if the easiest way to think about a diminished chord is you start with minor and lower that top note a half step. Here we have a minor third, 1, 2, 3 half steps. And another little minor third. 1, 2, 3 half steps. Minor third plus minor third. Diminished triad. Now, here's our minor triad. Nice perfect fifth, so we're going to name it by this interval. We have a minor third plus a major third on top. Now let's make it a major triad. Still nice little perfect fifth, so we'll name it with this interval. Major third. Major third on the bottom, actually a minor third on top. We have one more kind of triad. The least common is called augmented. So start with major and then take that top note up a half step too high. We're going to make it an augmented fifth. Augmented triad. Major third plus major third. So to just hear each of these, a diminished triad has that really compressed, smushed sound. Minor triads, kind of somber but fairly stable. Major triads, bright but stable. Now augmented triads, some people might describe it as kind of a dreamy or whimsical sound, but it's a pretty unusual chord. Okay, let's talk about triads and scales. So let's go through and see what kinds of triads we get built on each note in the scale. So for a C major scale, all white keys, easy to look at. The first note in the scale, the C chord, major. Minor for the second chord. Minor for the third. Major for the fourth. Major for the fifth. Minor for the sixth. What do you think this one is? Diminished. We actually do get one naturally occurring diminished chord built on the seventh note in the scale. And back to major. So there's 7 chords, just like there's 7 notes. There's 7 triads in each scale. Each major scale or minor scale. The first note, the first chord, the 1 chord, major. The 4 chord is major. The 5 chord is major. So those 3 form a nice little group. The 1 chord, the 4 chord, and the 5 chord. That's true for any scale. So there's your 1 chord, 1, 2, 3, 4 chord, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 chord. And so we also have 3 minor chords, the 2, the 3, and the 6. And then we have one little oddball chord, the 7 is diminished. So think of those 2 pairs of 3 chords, our one little oddball chord, and that'll be a helpful way to memorize these. Okay, now we're going to talk about inversions of triads. This is an interesting concept because just like I showed you when we played open position, even though this is kind of home base for our triads, our root is at the bottom, nice tucked away, nice clear little triad, easy to identify. But you can play the notes of the triad in all kinds of order, whichever one on the bottom, all mixed in, all mixed up, and it's still considered a triad because it's based on this concept of these 3 notes that are based on alternate steps in the scale. So this is what we call root position triad because the root is at the bottom. But what happens if we put the third of the chord as the bottom sounding note? We call this first inversion. It's still a C major triad. C is still the root, it's just kind of jumbled up. We call this second inversion. C is still the root. Root, third, fifth. So root position, this, and I'm showing you in closed position. This is closed position, root position. First inversion, second inversion, root position. As long as the root of the chord is your lowest sounding note, no matter, it's still root position. As long as the third of the chord is your lowest sounding, we can call it first inversion. As long as the fifth is the lowest sounding pitch, it is second inversion. And back to root position. Thank you for joining me for this lecture today, and let me know if you have any questions.